In the burning heart of the Namibian desert, where few men ever tread, an aging ranger witnessed something science never dared believe. A lion standing in the night, not roaring, but pleading. From that moment, Ethan was drawn into a journey beyond reason, where courage, sacrifice, and an impossible trust would forever blur the line between man and the wild. The desert did not roar that night. It breathed. Heat lingered in the sand like banked coals, and the wind moved as if it had learned to be careful. Ethan Hale drove the perimeter road with one hand on the wheel and the other resting near the radio, the way old habits rest near old bones. He had done this loop 1,000 times, seen dawn rise from a pale smudge to a brass coin, watched storms unroll like blankets across the horizon. Nothing much surprised him anymore, until the sound. It came from the darkness off his left fender, not the ripping thunder of a territorial roar, but something lower, rounder, almost broken in the middle. Ethan cut the headlights to half and rolled to a quiet stop. In that sudden hush, he could hear the engine ticking down and a far piece of wind combing a patch of thorn. Then it came again, one long plea that found a soft place under his ribs and pressed. He told himself it was just a call he did not recognize, a nuance lost to a younger version of himself who had once kept notes on behavior and cross-checked them with the field guides. He reached for the radio anyway. Base, Hale on North Track. I've got vocalization, single male, unusual tone. Static, then a thin return. Copy, Ethan. Keep distance. A second voice bled into the first, steadier, a woman's. This is Claire. If it's a male, don't try to play detective in the dark. Put the truck between you and him and wait. He thumbed the mic and said he would. Then he put the radio back and stepped out into the warm night. The sky was a shallow bowl of stars. Sand whispered under his boots. He slid the rifle strap from the rack, checked the tranquilizer cartridges by touch, and kept the muzzle pointed at the ground. He wasn't there to prove anything. He just needed to see. The eyes found him first. Amber, steady, set in a face broad with age and power. The lion stood on the packed earth like a bronze sculpture left in a field. Every curve smoothed by weather and time, yet very much alive. Ethan felt the old animal part of himself take a step back. The part that calculates distance and angles and how many heartbeats a body has to spend before it runs out. He did not raise the rifle. He did not run. The lion lifted his head and released a sound that was not threat and not triumph. It was closer to a sob. Then, with a slow and careful grace that did not match the heft of him, the lion took 3 steps forward and stopped, as if drawing a line on the ground with his paw. Ethan could feel that line as surely as if a boot heel had scored it into the dust. The animal lowered his sun, gazed to that invisible mark, then looked back at Ethan. A question lived there, or maybe a request. Easy, Ethan said, the word leaving his mouth the way you speak to a spooked horse. All right now. A breeze moved between them, and with it the lion turned, padded down the track, and after 10 yards paused. He looked over his shoulder, waited. Ethan could almost hear Claire's voice, as if she were standing beside him. Don't you do it. He could almost see Captain Ross in the map room, forefinger planted on a grid square, working the problem with coffee breath and a clipped tone. Protocol stacked up in his mind, page on page of caution that had kept a lot of rangers alive and a lot of tourists unbitten. He set the rifle in the crook of his arm and took a step after the lion. The radio hissed at his hip. Ethan, status? He pressed the talk button and kept his eyes on the animal. Visual on adult male. Behavior is not aggressive. He searched for the right word and found none that didn't sound foolish. "I'm observing." He let the mic fall against his vest and followed. The lion walked with the loose-hipped rhythm of a creature built to cross distance without remembering it. Twice he left the road and cut across stubbled ground toward the thorn. Twice he returned when Ethan hesitated. It felt like being led by a hand that did not know how to hold one. They reached a low seam of brush where the wind snagged and whispered. The lion moved along it, stopped again, and lifted onto his hind legs in a motion so sudden it nearly broke the spell. For a heartbeat, Ethan saw teeth and size and the simple arithmetic of survival. But the forepaws did not lash. They hovered, then lowered, and the animal dropped lightly back to earth. He made a small sound, a chuff, almost a cough, then pushed his muzzle toward the brush and backed away, leaving room where there had been none. Ethan crouched and found tracks in the sand, the story written in broken circles and smeared lines. A second lion, lighter, perhaps a female, the scuffed drag of a limb over distance. Near the roots of a thorn, a darker stain old enough to dull, new enough to carry the sweet metal smell he had learned to hate. He looked up at the male. The lion's chest rose and fell like a bellows that had stayed too long at the fire. "Base," Ethan said into the radio, keeping his voice low. "Confirm presence of adult female in the area. Possible injury." He waded through the static, picturing the faces on the other end turning from paperwork to the unkind dark beyond the station light. Claire came back. "If she's hurt, you back off and mark coordinates. We'll roll a team at first light." First light was hours away. Night does things to minds and wounds that daylight can't undo. Ethan knew that as surely as he knew the road he'd driven for years. He clicked the radio onto his belt and eased forward, parting the thorn with his forearm, letting the branches comb his sleeve. The smell grew, not just blood now, but infection, the wet heat of it riding the air. A fly lifted and settled again. He shifted the beam of his handlight, kept it low, feathered it across the ground. The lion did not crowd him. He stood just behind Ethan's left shoulder, a presence as large as a wall. Every nerve in Ethan's back knew it, and yet the fear came sheathed, like a knife wrapped in cloth. It wasn't that he trusted the animal. It was that the animal had trusted him first, and some old law demanded an answer. 10 paces into the brush, the sand fell away into a shallow depression where the thorn thickened. Ethan could not see the center of it, only the suggestion of mass and the matte shine of matted fur. He cut the light and let his eyes settle, counting under his breath the way he had taught himself to count when panic stretched moments thin. He heard breath before he saw the shape rise and fall, slow, labored, threaded with a faint rasp. He eased back out of the brush and stood to face the male. The lion's eyes held the light without flinching. In them, Ethan read something he could not prove to any supervisor on any report. Not understanding exactly, but patience. The kind a body learns when it can't fix a thing and must wait for someone who can. He went to the truck, hands steady now because there was work to do. He took the field kit, the cutters, the flashlight with the narrow beam, and slung the strap across his shoulder. He left the rifle where it was. Weight matters in the dark, and some weights you put down because carrying them sends the wrong message. He snapped a glow stick and tucked it into his pocket to cast a small, constant light. The night folded around him and made room. On the radio, he gave a bearing and a range and asked for Claire's ETA. She told him the roads to the north were washed in places, that a crew would form up, that they would come as fast as they could. He said thank you into the mic and heard himself mean it. Then he crossed back to the brush with the lion at his shoulder, like a shadow he had finally decided to keep. He did not rush the next steps. Old men don't rush at night, and Ethan had been old in the ways that count for longer than the calendar could prove. He talked as he moved, not because he believed the words mattered to the animals, but because they steadied the air. He spoke about the heat, about the way the sand keeps its secrets until morning, about the coffee at the station that always tasted faintly of dust. He spoke the way men speak to babies and to the ghosts of people they once loved. The brush closed behind him. The world narrowed to the cone of his light and the sound of breath that fought for itself. He lowered to one knee and brought the beam up slow, careful as a hand on a fevered brow. The light found tawny flank and the slick dark of a wound he couldn't yet see the edge of. The female did not lift her head. Her ears flicked once, twice, and stilled. Ethan let the light fall away again and sat back on his heel. The male settled in the sand behind him, close enough that Ethan could feel a tremor move through that great body and into the ground. It ran up through his boot soles and into his bones. It felt like the world itself shivering. He took a breath and let it out slow. "All right," he said to the night, to the wind, to the living weight at his back. "I'm here." Far off, a jackal called and another answered. Overhead, the stars held their places like old friends who knew enough to keep quiet. Ethan found the cutters by feel and laid them across his thigh. He adjusted the light to the narrowest beam and, with the patience of a man who has mended fences after storms and waited for calves to stand, he leaned forward to look for steel in flesh. Behind him, the lion lowered his head and made that broken sound again, softer now, as if the worst of it had passed to someone else to carry. Ethan nodded without turning. He understood the bargain. He had stepped over a line drawn in dust by a paw he would never hold, and there was no going back to the safe side of it. He raised the light. The metal gleamed. The night went very still, and Ethan Hale, who had spent a lifetime learning when to leave wild things alone, prepared to do the one thing the book did not allow. He prepared to follow the cry wherever it led. The sun was not yet up, but the world was already beginning to remember light. A gray hush draped itself over the desert, and in that narrow space between night and morning, Ethan Hale was still crouched in the thorn. He had not slept. The female lion's shallow breaths came and went like wind under a door. Each time she drew in air, he counted, afraid the next one wouldn't come. He had cleaned what he could with antiseptic from his field kit, cut the boughs around her to let more air move. The metal snare gleamed dull and mean in the beam of his flashlight, wrapped deep around her hind leg. It was the kind of trap that didn't just catch, it punished. And though he'd spent half his life fighting poachers, Ethan could tell this wasn't their work. The wire was heavier, military grade, fused to a post that didn't belong in any wilderness. Something about it felt wrong in his gut, the way a crooked nail squeaks in a good board. The male, his silent companion through the night, had not left his side. He moved in slow arcs, pacing, watching the brush line. Sometimes he stopped and looked at Ethan, the way a man checks to make sure a friend is still breathing. There were no threats in that look, no wild heat, only waiting. The radio at Ethan's hip hissed to life. "Base to Hale. Report your status." It was Claire's voice, thin with static but tight with worry. He thumbed the mic. "I've got an adult female with a snare. Severe tissue damage. Still alive but fading. Male's here. He's not hostile." Claire exhaled audibly. "Ethan, you need to keep your distance until we get there. You shouldn't even be that close." He looked over his shoulder. The male lion was sitting 10 yards behind him, A silent mountain, amber eyes unblinking. Ethan said quietly, "If I back off now, she won't make sunrise. You better hurry." He clipped the radio back on and rose slowly to stretch his legs. The sand told a whole story at his feet. Paw prints, blood, the churned earth where she'd struggled. He followed the trail a few yards away and saw drag marks cutting across the plain, the kind made by a creature too weak to walk. They wound toward a dry gulch before vanishing in the brush. Somewhere in that darkness, she had crawled until her body refused to move another inch. A sudden gust pushed dust across the ground, and for a heartbeat, the marks looked like writing, like something the desert itself wanted to say, but couldn't. Ethan rubbed his eyes and blinked the thought away. Long nights made a man imagine voices in the sand. He turned back. The lion watched him, chest rising in slow, deliberate rhythm. "You found her," Ethan murmured. "You led me right to her." The words sounded foolish, yet they filled the air between them with something heavy and human. The lion blinked once, slow, as if the gesture itself were a kind of answer. Ethan knelt beside the wounded lioness again, running a hand near her flank to check for breathing. She stirred, a low moan caught in her throat. Her skin twitched beneath his touch. He could feel the fever radiating from the wound. Infection had already started to claim her. He needed the veterinary team, but the roads were miles away, and the desert wasn't built for haste. He opened the kit again, drew out a small syringe, and filled it with a mild sedative meant for small wildlife. It wasn't enough for a lion, but it might dull the pain. "Easy, girl," he whispered, as if she could understand. "This isn't the end for you yet." The needle slid beneath the skin. The lioness flinched once, then settled. The male rumbled softly, a warning or maybe a prayer. Ethan didn't move for a long moment, listening to that sound vibrate through the stillness. Behind him, dawn arrived quietly. The first stripe of orange bled along the horizon, painting the tops of acacia thorns in bronze. The land began to stir. A pair of jackals called to each other across the dunes. The male lion lifted his head, nostrils flaring toward the new wind. Ethan took the moment to step back and scan the perimeter. Something was gnawing at him, a detail too small to name but too sharp to ignore. About 20 yards away, he found it. A series of deep boot prints pressed into the sand, half filled by dust. Human. Recent. Someone had been here before him. He crouched, tracing the outline with one gloved hand. The tread was military, not poacher's cheap rubber. It led north, toward the old service trail that had been closed years ago after the landmines were cleared, or supposedly cleared. He followed the prints a few yards before they vanished among the rocks. When he looked up again, the lion had moved closer, blocking the path as if to say, "Don't." Ethan raised his palms in surrender. All right. You win." He returned to the clearing and poured water from his canteen into a shallow metal lid. The lioness stirred again, weak but alive. He watched as the male nudged her gently, guiding her muzzle toward the water. She drank, slow and trembling. Ethan swallowed hard. He'd seen loyalty in the wild before, mates, herds, packs. But never this kind of devotion. It had weight. It had intention. The radio cracked again, startling him. "Ethan, this is Captain Ross. We've got your coordinates. Team's en route with Dr. Mason. 45 minutes out. Do not, repeat, do not engage. You understand me?" He pressed the mic, eyes still on the lion. "Copy that, sir." Then, after a pause, almost to himself, but I don't think I have much choice in the matter. As the minutes crawled, the heat returned, thick and unforgiving. Ethan worked to loosen the snare, careful not to startle the animal. The metal was welded into a spiral, its teeth biting deep into flesh. His hands shook as he adjusted the cutters. The smell was turning worse, a sour blend of rot and iron. He could hear flies already building their chorus. The lion moved closer, no more than 6 feet away now. Ethan could feel the tremor of its breathing against his spine. "I know," he whispered, sweat running into his eyes. "I'll hurry." When the steel gave a tiny snap, the lioness jerked, and Ethan froze. The male's growl rose from deep inside the earth, rolling over him like thunder. Ethan didn't move. Seconds dragged. The growl tapered off, replaced by that same low, broken sound he'd heard in the dark. The lion wasn't angry. He was afraid. Ethan swallowed the lump in his throat and kept cutting. The sun was above the dunes now, turning everything the color of brass. He thought of Claire somewhere on the road, bouncing in the back of a truck, cursing his name for getting himself into another impossible mess. He'd always been the kind of man who stepped forward when others stepped back, and it had cost him more than once. But this was different. This wasn't about rules or rank. It was about a creature who had looked him in the eye and asked for help. When he finally pried the last coil loose, the lioness let out a long, shuddering sigh. Ethan eased the snare aside and wrapped the wound with gauze. It was temporary at best, but it would slow the bleeding. He glanced toward the lion, half expecting an attack, but the great animal only lowered his head beside his mate and breathed against her fur. Ethan stood slowly, legs stiff, back sore. The horizon shimmered. The tracks he'd seen earlier, those boot prints, haunted him. Someone had set this trap, someone with tools and purpose. It wasn't poachers this time. It was something larger, colder. He keyed the radio again. "Base, it's Hale. I need security to sweep Sector 9 after we extract. Possible unauthorized personnel. Repeat, not poachers." Ross's reply came sharp. "Acknowledged. You better still be alive when we get there." Ethan smiled despite himself. "Working on it, sir." He looked back at the lions. The male had settled, one paw resting lightly across the female's shoulder, as if to keep her tethered to the world. Ethan felt a pull in his chest, that old ache of recognition, of love, of fear, of knowing what it means to stand guard over something fragile. He stepped away, giving them space, but his thoughts wouldn't quiet. Why lead him here? Why trust a human when humans had caused this? Maybe the answer was simple. Maybe the lion didn't see a man at all, just another creature who could fix what was broken. Ethan turned toward the truck, the desert stretching endless in every direction. Behind him, the lion's low call rose again, softer now, almost gentle. He paused, hand on the door, and looked back. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "You brought me here for a reason. Let's see it through." The wind carried the scent of dust and metal. Somewhere out there, beyond the dunes, a trail of human footprints led into a truth he didn't yet understand. But for now, there was only this moment. The wounded lioness, her silent guardian, and the man who had stepped out of the safety of his truck into the fragile space where fear ends and duty begins. The first vultures circled high above, black specks against the morning glare. Ethan shaded his eyes, watched them turn, and muttered to himself, "Not today, boys. Not today." Then he walked back to the clearing, where the sound of the lion's breathing mixed with his own. Two rhythms trying to hold the same fragile promise until help arrived. The morning settled into that strange silence only deserts know. Too still, too bright, as if the land itself were holding its breath. Ethan Hale knelt beside the wounded lioness, his knees grinding into the coarse sand, and wondered how long she had been there before the male found him. Hours? Days? Her body told the story in every shallow breath and twitch of her flank. The wound was angry now, swollen and slick, the snare cutting deeper each time she tried to move. He had loosened it as much as he dared, but the steel still owned her. The male lay just beyond the circle of thorn, head resting on his paws. His amber eyes were half-lidded but alert, the kind of watchfulness that never slept. When Ethan shifted to check the bandage, the lion's ears flicked, a warning or maybe a reminder that every motion was being measured. "Easy, friend," Ethan murmured, his voice rough from a night without water. "We're both tired." He heard the faint crackle of the radio before the voice came through. "Hale, this is Claire. We're 15 minutes out. How's she holding up?" He looked down at the lioness. "Still breathing?" "Barely." "Keep your distance till we get there," she said. "I mean it, Ethan. That male, he's unpredictable." "Yeah," he said, glancing toward the lion who hadn't moved an inch. "That makes two of us." He clicked the mic off and sighed. The sky was clear and white now, the color of bone. Heat was rising fast, making the air shimmer over the ground. Ethan squinted toward the horizon and saw the faint haze of a vehicle's dust trail. Relief came quick and shallow, but so did unease. Something about this place, the wire, those footprints, none of it fit the pattern of a poacher's work. He reached for his canteen and poured a trickle of water near the lioness's mouth. She tried to lift her head, but couldn't. Ethan cupped his hand and dribbled a few drops onto her tongue. The male lifted his head at that, watching with a low rumble that sounded more like thunder far away than a growl. Ethan froze until the sound faded, then kept going. "It's all right," he whispered. "I'm not taking her from you." The lion blinked slowly, the kind of slow that meant understanding or resignation. Ethan wasn't sure which. He studied the female again, tracing the edge of the snare with his eyes. The wire was fused to a stake buried deep in the ground, impossible to remove without heavy cutters. His small field pair had barely dented it. He cursed under his breath and dug through his pack for the emergency bolt saw. It wasn't meant for this, but neither was he. He slid the saw beneath the twisted steel and began to work. The rasp of metal against metal filled the clearing. Every few seconds he paused to check her breathing. The male stayed perfectly still, his tail flicking just once, like a slow metronome marking the tempo of Ethan's fear. Sweat stung his eyes. His arm burned. He was halfway through the first coil when a faint sound made him stop. A soft whine, high and thin, coming from the lioness herself. Not a growl, not a roar, just pain trying to speak. Ethan laid a hand on her shoulder. Her muscles twitched, but she didn't flinch away. "You're tougher than you look, girl," he said quietly. "Let's get you out of this mess." Another 10 minutes, and the saw bit through. The wire sprang loose, slicing his glove open in the process. He jerked his hand back, blood beading along his palm. The male's head shot up at the movement, a low rumble rolling out of his chest. Ethan froze, holding his breath. "It's fine," he said softly, voice trembling. "Just a scratch." The lion stood now, huge and impossibly silent, the muscles under his hide rippling like a current. He took a step forward, then another, until he was close enough for Ethan to feel the heat of his body through the dry air. The ranger's pulse hammered in his throat. If this is it, he thought, at least she'll live. But the lion didn't strike. He lowered his head until his muzzle hovered inches from Ethan's bleeding hand, sniffed once, then exhaled through his nose. The breath was hot and damp against Ethan's skin. It felt like judgment. Then the animal turned and looked down at the lioness, pressing his forehead gently to hers. The sound that left his throat was so soft, it broke something in Ethan's chest. He swallowed hard, blinking the grit from his eyes. "She's free now," he said. "Do what you have to do." The lion stayed beside his mate, grooming the edge of her wound with slow, deliberate strokes of his tongue. Ethan knew it wasn't enough. The infection would still win. But it was love, in its truest shape, raw and wordless. The whine of an approaching engine broke the moment. Claire's truck bounced into view, dust trailing behind it. Ethan waved, and the lion lifted his head, ears pricked. The vehicle slowed, stopped 100 yards away. Claire climbed out, a tall figure in a khaki vest, her ponytail whipping in the wind. 2 rangers followed, rifles slung low. Ethan motioned for them to stay back. "They're calm," he called. "Don't spook them." Claire jogged up, breathless. She took one look at the scene, the lions, the blood, the severed wire, and exhaled sharply. "Dear God, Ethan, what did you do?" "Broke a few rules," he said. "But she'd have been dead if I hadn't." She dropped to one knee beside him, professional instinct taking over. Her eyes flicked across the wound, calculating. "You weren't wrong," she admitted. "She's septic already. We'll need to flush and sedate her before transport." One of the rangers behind her spoke quietly. "What about the male?" Ethan glanced over his shoulder. "He's not a problem," he said. "Not unless you make him one." Claire nodded, but kept her voice low. "We'll use the dart if we have to. You sure he'll stay put?" Ethan hesitated. "He led me here," he said finally. "He's got more sense than most men I've met." They worked quickly. Claire prepared the sedative dart while Ethan steadied the lioness's head. The male watched, tense but unmoving. When the dart struck, the lioness flinched and gave a weak groan. But the drug took hold fast. Her breathing deepened, steadier now. Claire began cleaning the wound, her hands efficient and calm. The silence that followed was strange, fragile, like a truce that could break at any breath. Then a distant crack echoed from the north ridge, sharp, mechanical. Claire froze. That wasn't thunder. Ethan's eyes shot up. He knew that sound too well. A rifle. The male lion jerked upright, muscles coiled. He stared toward the ridge, nostrils flaring. A second later, another crack split the air, closer this time. The rangers spun, scanning the horizon. "Poachers?" one of them asked. Ethan shook his head slowly. "No, something else." He didn't say what he was thinking, that the boot prints he'd seen at dawn had pointed straight toward that ridge, that someone had been watching long before he got here. "Load her fast," he told Claire. "We're not alone out here." They moved with new urgency. The team lifted the sedated lioness onto a canvas stretcher. The male growled low, pacing, his tail thrashing the air. Ethan stepped in front of him, hands raised. "Easy, boy," he said. "They're taking her to help. You can follow if you want, but don't." The next gunshot cut him off. The sand near his boot exploded. Claire screamed his name. Ethan dove for cover, dragging Claire behind a low mound. The rangers returned fire blindly toward the ridge. The lion roared, a sound that shook the ground and sent every bird in the sky wheeling upward. When the echoes faded, silence returned heavier than before. Whoever had fired was gone, or waiting. Claire looked at him, face pale. What the hell was that? Ethan's jaw tightened. The reason she was caught in that trap. He rose slowly, scanning the horizon. The ridge was empty, but he could feel eyes somewhere beyond it, watching, measuring. He turned back to the lions. The male was standing over the stretcher now, chest heaving, his eyes wild with something between fear and fury. Ethan approached carefully, every step a gamble. "Listen to me," he said, his voice low but steady. "You brought me here for her. Let me finish the job. I'll get her safe." The lion's gaze held him for a long moment. Then, with a low rumble, he stepped aside. Ethan nodded once, signaling the team. They loaded the stretcher into the truck bed, securing it with straps. Claire climbed in beside the lioness, checking her vitals. Ethan swung into the passenger seat. As the engine started, the male lion began to walk. Not away, alongside. His head was level with the window, his stride easy, as if he meant to escort them. Claire stared, astonished. "He's following us." "Yeah," Ethan said, watching through the dust. "And he's not going to stop." The truck rolled forward, tires crunching over the sand. The lion moved beside them, silent and relentless. And somewhere behind the dunes, the wind carried a faint metallic clatter, the sound of more snares being set, or perhaps something far worse waiting just beyond the next turn of the desert road. The truck bounced hard over the uneven sand, its suspension groaning with every dip. Dust poured through the open windows, coating Ethan Hale's tongue with the taste of iron and heat. Beside him, Dr. Claire Mason kept one hand on the sedated lioness and the other gripping the door handle, her knuckles white. Behind them, 2 rangers stood in the bed of the vehicle, rifles ready, scanning the shimmering horizon. The lion followed in silence, his massive paws sending up low clouds of grit. He didn't run or fall behind. He simply moved with them, as though tethered to the wounded mate he refused to abandon. "Ethan," Claire said finally, breaking the long silence. "What the hell happened out there?" He wiped sweat from his brow. "Someone set that snare on purpose. Not for poaching, something else. The steel was military grade, and those shots we heard? That wasn't hunting fire. They were warning us off." She frowned, still focused on the lioness's breathing. "You're saying there's an armed group inside the reserve?" "I'm saying," Ethan replied quietly, "we're not supposed to find out." They hit another rut, and the lioness groaned, her paw twitching weakly. Claire leaned forward. "She's fading again. Pulse is dropping. If we don't flush that wound, the infection will—" "We're 20 minutes from camp," Ethan said. "She doesn't have 20 minutes." He looked out the window. The sun was a burning coin overhead, flattening every shadow. The lion was still there, pacing alongside, close enough that Ethan could see the ripple of muscle beneath the dust-matted fur. The sight of that creature, grieving, relentless, did something to him that orders never could. He felt the weight of every regulation, every memo about procedure and safety, and for the first time in years, he wanted to tear the whole book in half. "Stop the truck," he said suddenly. Claire's head snapped up. "What?" "Stop it. Now!" The ranger at the wheel hesitated, but obeyed. The vehicle skidded to a halt, sand spraying out from the tires. The lion stopped too, head lowering, tail flicking like a pendulum. Ethan jumped out, grabbed his kit, and walked toward the back. "We do this here," he said, voice flat. "If we wait, she's gone." "Ethan, you can't," Claire said, following him. "You don't have the right tools. And that male," "That male," he interrupted, "brought me to her. He hasn't touched a hair on my head. If he wanted me dead, we wouldn't be talking." Claire looked from Ethan to the lion and back again. "And if you're wrong? Then I die doing something that makes sense for once." She opened her mouth to argue, but stopped. His voice wasn't defiant. It was calm, almost resigned. The kind of calm that comes from men who've already made peace with consequences. Ethan climbed into the truck bed beside the lioness. "Get me the saline, antibiotics, and the heavy cutters. I'll need you to stabilize her head." Claire hesitated only a second before barking orders to the rangers. They moved quickly, setting up a field perimeter. The desert around them pulsed with heat, the air rippling like glass. The lion prowled in slow circles, never taking his eyes off them. Ethan went to work. He cleaned the wound, speaking softly as he worked, not to Claire, not to the men, but to the lioness herself. "Hang on, sweetheart. You've done your part. Let me do mine." Claire knelt opposite him, hands steady, her voice clinical but soft. "You're insane," she murmured, "but don't stop." They cut away the last of the embedded wire. Blood welled dark and thick. Ethan pressed a sterile pad against the wound, then reached for the antibiotics. He drew the injection, found a clear vein, and pushed the plunger. The lioness shuddered once, then went still again. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Even the wind had stopped. Then the lion roared. It wasn't a threat. It was grief. It was the sound of something ancient breaking open in the heart of the desert. The rangers flinched, fingers tightening on triggers, but Ethan raised his hand. "Hold your fire." The lion walked closer, slow, deliberate. Each step sank deep into the sand. He reached the tailgate and lifted his head just high enough for his eyes to meet Ethan's. The world seemed to narrow to that single gaze. Ethan spoke, his voice low but clear. "She's still alive. I need to finish." The lion stood motionless. Seconds stretched. Then, with a slow exhale, he dropped to his belly beside the truck, eyes never leaving his mate. Claire whispered, "He's letting you." Ethan didn't answer. His throat was too tight for words. He rinsed the wound, wrapped it with gauze, and taped it firm. When he finally leaned back, his hands were shaking, his clothes streaked with blood and dust. The lioness's chest still moved, faint but steady. Claire checked her vitals and nodded once. "You bought her some time." "Time's all I've got to give," Ethan said. A gust of wind tore across the plain, carrying with it the faint echo of an engine. Distant, low, approaching. Ethan turned sharply. The rangers picked up the sound too. One of them raised his binoculars. "Vehicle coming fast from the North Ridge. Single truck." Claire frowned. "That's not ours. We're the only convoy scheduled today." "Then we've got company." Ethan jumped down, signaling the others to take cover behind the Land Rover. "Keep her down and stay out of sight." He raised his field glasses. The truck barreled toward them, its windows blacked out, dust kicking up in a thick trail. No insignia, no park markings. "Ross isn't going to like this," he muttered. The lead ranger cursed under his breath. "Orders, sir?" Ethan's jaw clenched. Orders. He was done with those. "Claire," he said, eyes still on the oncoming vehicle. "Get her stabilized for transport. We leave the moment this thing passes." "And if it doesn't?" she asked. "Then we improvise." The strange truck slowed about 200 yards away, idling, watching. Ethan couldn't see faces, just silhouettes. One figure leaned out the window, holding something shiny, maybe binoculars, maybe a scope. The lion growled low beside the truck bed, his body coiled to spring. Ethan raised his hand slowly to calm him. "Don't," he murmured. "Not yet." The vehicle lingered for a minute, then two, before turning away, disappearing into the heat waves like a ghost swallowed by the desert. Claire exhaled shakily. "What do you think they wanted?" "Same thing we all do," Ethan said grimly. "To keep secrets buried." He climbed back into the cab, slammed the door, and radioed base. "Captain Ross, this is Hale. We've got unauthorized personnel in the northern sector. Possible paramilitary presence. I need immediate security dispatch." Static filled the air. Then Ross's voice cut through, sharp and incredulous. "What the hell are you talking about, Hale? There's no authorization for anyone north of your position." "Then someone forgot to tell them," Ethan said. He explained quickly, the shots, the boot prints, the unmarked truck. Ross's tone hardened. "You're out of line, Hale. You're not cleared to make those calls. Get back to base and wait for investigation." Ethan stared at the horizon, where the dust trail was already fading. "Negative, sir. I'm taking her straight to the veterinary outpost. We can't wait." "That's a direct order, Hale. Stand down." Ethan reached for the radio switch. His thumb hovered over it. He thought of the lioness bleeding in the back, of the male walking beside them mile after mile, of all the years he'd followed rules that served no one but paperwork. "With respect, sir," he said quietly. "You'll have to fire me later." Then he clicked the radio off. Claire looked at him from the passenger seat. "You just ended your career." He started the engine. "Then let's make it worth ending." The Land Rover lurched forward, climbing the slope toward the distant glint of the outpost's metal roof. The lion followed, unhurried, a golden shadow against the endless white sand. Behind them, the wind erased their tracks, one by one, as if the desert itself understood the price of defiance. Ethan gripped the wheel tighter, eyes fixed on the wavering horizon. He had broken the one rule that defined every ranger's life: never act alone. But as the roar of the engine merged with the low rumble of the lion pacing beside them, he felt something he hadn't in years. It wasn't pride. It wasn't courage. It was the quiet conviction that, for once, he was exactly where he was meant to be. The road back to the outpost was nothing but heat and distance, a thin scar running across the back of the desert. The tires threw up sheets of dust that clung to the Land Rover like smoke. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of antiseptic, metal, and fear. Claire kept one hand on the lioness's flank, monitoring the rise and fall of her breath. Each shallow movement came slower than the last. Ethan drove with both windows down, sweat streaking his temples, his eyes on the wavering line of horizon that seemed to keep sliding away from him. "Her temperature's dropping," Claire said, her voice tight. "She's going into shock. I need to start fluids." Ethan nodded. "Do it. Whatever you have to." She rigged an IV from the ceiling handle, the fluid bag swaying gently as the truck bounced over the uneven ground. Every jolt drew a faint sound from the lioness, a breath caught halfway between life and leaving. The male lion followed beside them, keeping pace even as the sun hammered the land into gold and white. He didn't falter. Every few seconds he'd lift his head toward the truck window, checking as though making sure she was still there. The radio crackled again, but Ethan ignored it. He had already crossed the line with Captain Ross, and there was no going back now. He could almost hear the reprimand waiting for him. Reckless, insubordinate, dangerous. But rules didn't bleed, and rules didn't breathe. The lioness did, barely. Claire looked over at him. "You realize when we get back, they'll suspend you." Ethan smiled faintly, his eyes never leaving the road. "I've been suspended before. Not for anything that mattered, though." The sound of the engine filled the truck, steady and low, like a heartbeat. The heat shimmered off the hood, and Ethan's vision blurred for a second. He blinked hard, refocused. Ahead, the outpost's radio towers shimmered like a mirage. Maybe an hour away, maybe less. A sudden movement caught his eye, a flicker of color against the sand. He slowed instinctively, squinting through the glare. The lion growled low, ears pricked forward. Claire followed his gaze. "What is it?" "Something's wrong," Ethan murmured. He eased the truck to a crawl. At first it looked like just another patch of desert scrub. But then he saw it. A line of disturbed sand running perpendicular to the road, too clean, too straight. His gut tightened. "Trap line," he said. "Buried wire." He hit the brakes. The truck lurched to a stop. Claire clutched the seat. "What kind of trap?" "The kind that doesn't care what it catches." Ethan climbed out, boots crunching in the sand. The lion stopped too, standing perfectly still, eyes fixed on the line ahead. The air was dead quiet, no wind, no birds. Even the heat seemed to pause. Ethan crouched, brushing his gloved hand over the sand. The faint outline of a pressure plate glinted beneath the surface. Military again. He exhaled slowly. Claire leaned out the window. "Tell me that's not—" "It is," Ethan said. "Landmine. Probably old, maybe unstable. But whoever's been out here," he shook his head. "They've been planting new ones." He stood wiping the sweat and grit from his brow. The lion's gaze followed his every move, unblinking. "We can't go forward," Claire said. "We'll have to turn around." Ethan looked toward the horizon. The mine line stretched wide on both sides, a serpent buried beneath the earth. "We can't go back either. Those shooters from the ridge, they'll catch up before we hit the main road." "So what do we do?" Ethan's eyes drifted toward the lion. The great cat had begun to pace, moving along the invisible barrier, nose to the ground. He stopped, then looked back at Ethan, chuffing softly. Claire frowned. "Is he—" "Showing us something," Ethan said. "Same as before." He followed step by step, careful where he placed his feet. The lion moved with strange precision, weaving through the sand until he reached a narrow strip of exposed stone that cut across the desert like a spine. He looked back, tail flicking. Ethan turned to Claire. "He's found a way through." "You're not serious," she said. "I wish I wasn't." He climbed back into the cab and started the engine. "Keep her steady. Stay right behind him." The Land Rover crept forward, tires crunching softly. The lion led them in a slow, deliberate arc, staying on the rocky ground. Every few yards, Ethan's heart stopped, expecting the world to erupt beneath them. But the path held. When they finally cleared the minefield, he exhaled for the first time in minutes. Claire let out a breathless laugh. That animal just saved our lives?" "Yeah," Ethan said quietly. "Seems he's been doing that a lot lately." They drove the next few miles in silence. The lioness's breathing steadied slightly, but Ethan could see how pale her gums had become, how weak the pulse was beneath her fur. He pressed the accelerator a little harder. By late afternoon, the outpost came into view, a scatter of prefab buildings shimmering under the heat. Relief washed through him, chased quickly by exhaustion. As the truck rolled to a stop, a small team of medics and rangers ran out to meet them. Claire jumped down first. "Get the surgery unit ready. She's critical." They lifted the lioness from the truck and carried her toward the shaded medical bay. Ethan followed until one of the medics blocked his way. "Sir, we've got it from here." He nodded, stepping aside, but his eyes stayed on the lioness until the doors swung shut behind her. The male lion had stopped just outside the chain-link fence that marked the outpost perimeter. He sat down heavily, his mane rippling in the wind, eyes fixed on the building where they'd taken his mate. No growl, no movement. Just waiting. Ethan walked to the fence, stopping a few feet from the great cat. For a long moment, neither of them moved. "You did good," Ethan said quietly. "You brought her home." The lion blinked slowly, lowering his head. Claire joined him, wiping sweat from her neck. "He's not leaving, is he?" "Would you?" Ethan asked. They stood there until the sun began to slide west, turning the sand to bronze. The wind picked up again, carrying with it the smell of dust and blood and antiseptic. Somewhere inside the medical bay, machines began to hum, the sound faint but steady. Claire touched his arm. "You should rest, Ethan. You've been running on fumes since last night." He shook his head. "Not yet." He leaned against the fence, watching the lion. "There's something about him, Claire. He knew what he was doing from the start." She gave a tired smile. "Don't start romanticizing him. He's still a wild predator." Ethan didn't answer. He was staring at the lion. And in that stillness, something unexpected happened. The big cat rose, walked closer to the fence, and pressed his forehead gently against the wire mesh, right where Ethan stood. The contact was soft, deliberate. Ethan froze, his breath caught in his throat. He lifted a trembling hand and pressed it to the same spot, metal between skin and fur. Claire whispered, "My God." It lasted only a moment, but it was enough. In that touch, through steel, through fear, Ethan felt the weight of everything unsaid. Gratitude, trust, recognition, the bridge between two worlds that were never meant to meet. Then the lion stepped back and lay down, his massive frame settling into the sand. His eyes stayed open, fixed on the building, on the life inside it that still clung to breath. Ethan turned away before Claire could see the moisture gathering in his eyes. "Let him stay close," he said. "If he's come this far, he's earned the right." As he walked toward the outpost door, the first stars began to show against the fading sky. The day's heat was breaking, and with it, something inside Ethan eased too. He had crossed every line, broken every rule, but for once, it didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like faith, unspoken, ancient, and alive. Inside, the air smelled of medicine and sweat. Outside, beyond the wire, a lion kept his vigil beneath the rising moon, waiting in silence for the world to prove itself worthy of the trust he'd given. Night dropped hard over the outpost, a velvet darkness stitched with the hum of generators and the occasional rustle of wind through the wire fence. Ethan Hale sat outside the medical bay, elbows on his knees, a cup of stale coffee cooling between his hands. Inside, he could hear the muffled voices of the veterinary team working on the lioness. The sound of clinking instruments, quiet commands, and the low beep of monitors carried through the thin walls. He hadn't moved in hours. His uniform was stiff with dried blood and sand, his body aching from 30 straight hours without rest. But it wasn't fatigue that kept him rooted. It was the weight of everything he couldn't explain. The lion was still there, a shadow at the edge of the floodlight's reach. Every so often, the great beast would shift positions, lying down, then standing, pacing a slow circle before sitting again. Never roaring, never leaving, waiting. Ethan took a sip of the cold coffee and grimaced. He didn't hear the approach of Captain Ross until the man's boots crunched the gravel behind him. "You made quite a mess out there," Ross said, his voice like gravel ground under pressure. Ethan didn't turn around. "You're welcome. That's not funny. Wasn't trying to be." Ross came closer, folding his arms. He was shorter than Ethan, but carried himself like a man used to being obeyed. "You disobeyed a direct order, endangered a medical team, and brought a live predator within 100 yards of base housing. I should have your badge by sunrise." Ethan rubbed the bridge of his nose. "And yet, here I am, drinking bad coffee instead of filling out death reports for that lioness." Ross's jaw tightened. "You don't know that yet. She's not out of danger." A door opened behind them, spilling white light into the night. Claire stepped out, pulling off her surgical gloves. Her face was pale but calm. "She made it through the procedure," she said quietly. "We cleaned the wound, removed the last of the wire. She's stable, for now." Ethan stood. "How bad?" "Worse than we thought," Claire said. "The infection's deep. We'll have to monitor her for sepsis. She's still sedated." She hesitated before adding, "If you hadn't cut that snare when you did, she'd be dead." Ross frowned. "You're not helping his case, Doctor." Claire shot him a look. "I'm stating a fact." Ross ignored her, turning back to Ethan. "You said that trap wasn't set by poachers. You stand by that?" "Absolutely," Ethan said. "The metal was reinforced, factory cut, and there were boot prints, military tread, same as the landmines we hit on the way back." Ross's expression shifted, just slightly. "Landmines?" Ethan nodded. "Old ones, maybe, but I'd bet half my pension they're new. Someone's been planting ordnance out there." Ross's face darkened. "That's impossible. The Army cleared this region years ago." "Then explain the wire and the gunfire," Ethan said. "Explain the unmarked truck that tailed us and then vanished into thin air." Ross opened his mouth, then closed it again. He looked toward the fence, where the lion still waited like a ghost carved from gold and shadow. "You're saying whoever set those traps was using restricted land inside the reserve?" Ethan nodded slowly. "And they didn't expect anyone to find them, least of all a ranger with a lion for a guide?" Claire crossed her arms. "Who would do that? What's the point of laying mines in a wildlife reserve?" Ross hesitated before answering. "Not everything out here's about wildlife. There are other interests. Private contractors, border security, weapons testing. You've been around long enough to know how things work, Hale." Ethan's stomach tightened. "So that's it? You knew?" Ross's voice dropped. "Watch your tone. You knew there were live explosives out there, and you didn't warn us?" "I didn't know the scope," Ross said. "And you're not cleared for this conversation." Ethan laughed bitterly. "You're kidding me. You think this is about clearance? A wild animal had to drag me halfway across the desert to show me what you people are hiding." Ross took a step closer, lowering his voice. "I said enough. This isn't your fight. You bring the lioness in, you file your report, and you forget what you saw." Ethan stared at him. "And if I don't?" Ross met his gaze. "Then I make you wish you had." The tension hung between them until Claire broke it with a sharp breath. "Enough. Whatever politics you two are playing, that animal in there doesn't care. She just wants to live. So unless either of you knows how to do surgery, maybe shut up and help me keep her alive." Ross turned away first, muttering something under his breath before heading back toward the command tent. Ethan watched him go, jaw clenched. Claire touched his arm. "He's scared," she said softly. "You exposed something. People like Ross don't know what to do when the truth gets loose." Ethan exhaled slowly. "I don't care about politics. I just want to know why that snare was there." She nodded toward the lion outside the fence. "Maybe you should ask him." Ethan followed her gaze. The male had risen to his feet again, pacing restlessly. The floodlights made his mane shimmer like fire. Something in his movements felt off, an unease that prickled along Ethan's spine. He walked to the fence, hands loose at his sides. The lion stopped and looked directly at him. For a moment, the two simply regarded each other, man and beast bound by an unspoken understanding. Then, without warning, the lion turned his head toward the north ridge, the same ridge where the gunshots had come from, and growled. Low, deliberate. Ethan frowned. "What is it?" The lion growled again, louder this time, staring into the darkness beyond the fence line. Claire appeared behind him. "Ethan, what's going on?" He pointed. "Something's out there." Before she could respond, the floodlights flickered, then died, plunging the outpost into sudden blackness. The hum of the generator cut out, replaced by the hiss of the wind and the rapid thud of boots as men shouted in confusion. "Power's out!" someone yelled. Ethan's instincts kicked in. "Get inside!" he barked. Claire ran for the medical bay. The lion roared, a deep, thunderous sound that shook the night. Through the darkness, Ethan could see movement, shadows along the ridge, the faint glint of metal. Gunfire erupted. The first round hit the fence, sending sparks into the air. Men shouted, diving for cover. Ethan drew his sidearm and dropped behind a sandbag wall. "Who the hell is shooting?" Claire's voice called from inside. Ethan didn't answer. He fired a warning shot toward the ridge. The attackers didn't return fire immediately. They were probing, testing defenses. Then came the sound of engines. 2 trucks descending the slope fast. The lion roared again, louder than the gunfire. Ethan caught sight of him charging the fence, hitting it hard enough to rattle the steel. He wasn't attacking the base. He was reacting to the gunman. The same threat he'd warned them about in the desert had come to finish the job. Ethan ducked as a bullet whined past his head. He shouted toward the command tent. "Ross, we've got hostiles inbound!" Ross's voice came through the chaos. "We're returning fire. Get the doctor and the animals to cover." Ethan sprinted toward the medical bay. Inside, Claire was crouched beside the lioness's table, shielding her from falling debris. "She can't be moved," she shouted. "Then we hold here," Ethan said. Outside, the lion slammed into the gate again, this time bending the steel latch. He didn't stop. With a final roar, he tore through the weakened fence and burst into the open. "Ethan!" Claire cried. But he was already moving, out the door, weapon in hand. Through the smoke and dust, he saw the lion charging toward the oncoming trucks. The vehicles skidded, swerving as the massive beast hit them head-on. Gunfire cracked, sparks flying off the metal frames. One of the trucks veered off course and flipped, landing in a plume of sand. Ethan fired at the second, hitting a tire. The truck slowed, then stopped. The gunmen inside bailed, running into the dark. The lion roared after them, his mane glowing faintly in the flickering firelight. When it was over, the silence returned, heavy, absolute. The lion stood panting, a dark stain spreading across his shoulder. Blood. Ethan ran to him. "No, no, no, stay with me." The lion turned his head, eyes meeting Ethan's. There was no fear there, only a strange calm, as if he'd known all along this was how it would go. He lowered himself onto the sand, breathing slow, each exhale deeper than the last. Claire came running, flashlight trembling in her hand. "He's hit!" "I know," Ethan said, voice cracking. He knelt beside the lion, one hand on the warm fur. "He saved us." Claire's voice softened. He always knew who the real enemy was. Ethan looked toward the wrecked trucks smoldering in the distance. "Yeah," he whispered. And now we know too. The truth settled over him like dust, heavy, inescapable. The trap hadn't been set for animals. It had been bait, meant to hide something larger, something human. Whatever the lion had uncovered out there in the desert, it wasn't just a crime against nature. It was a cover-up of something far worse. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of burning fuel and blood. Ethan bowed his head beside the fallen lion, the weight of understanding pressing against his chest. For the first time in years, he felt small. Not from fear, but from the realization that the wild, in all its untamed grace, had just proven itself more honorable than the people sworn to protect it. Somewhere inside the medical bay, the lioness stirred on her table, alive because of him, because of both of them. And out in the sand, beneath the indifferent stars, the truth waited, patient and terrible, for dawn to bring it into view. Morning came, slowly, dragging light across the desert as though the sun itself feared to look at what the night had left behind. Smoke still drifted from the wrecked trucks, half buried in sand. The scent of fuel and scorched metal hung heavy in the air. A few rangers moved quietly among the debris, collecting shell casings, snapping photos, speaking in low tones. They avoided the center of the camp, where the lion lay. Ethan Hale hadn't slept. He sat near the animal's head, hat in his hands, the brim turning slowly between his fingers. The lion's breathing was shallow but steady, a slow rhythm that matched the faint hum of the generators that had sputtered back to life at dawn. Claire Mason crouched a few yards away, wrapping a fresh bandage over the wound on the lion's shoulder. "He lost a lot of blood," she said softly. "But the bullet went clean through. If we can keep him hydrated and infection-free, he might have a chance." Ethan nodded, his eyes never leaving the lion's face. "He's earned it." Ross stood behind them, hands on his hips, face drawn. He had been on the radio for most of the night, trying to reach someone higher up the chain of command. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse. "The trucks belong to a private security contractor," he said. "No insignia, no registration. The kind that doesn't exist on paper." "Cover-up?" Ethan asked. Ross didn't answer directly. "They were guarding something on the North Ridge, something they didn't want anyone finding. And the lion found it," Ethan said quietly. Ross looked at him. "He didn't just find it. He forced us to see it." Claire tied off the last bandage and sat back. "So what happens now?" Ross rubbed his temples. "We keep quiet. We clean up, report the incident as poaching activity gone wrong. Anything else, and the government shuts this whole place down." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You'd lie to save your job?" "To save the park," Ross shot back. "If the wrong people pull funding, every animal here is finished." Claire stood, anger flashing across her face. "So we just pretend? Pretend that an animal risked his life to save ours, and we're too afraid to admit it?" Ross looked exhausted. "You think anyone would believe that? That a lion led a ranger through the desert to uncover an illegal weapons operation? They'd laugh us out of the service." He turned and walked away, shoulders heavy, leaving silence behind him. Ethan stared after him, then looked back at the lion. "You hear that, big guy? Guess you're too inconvenient for their paperwork." The lion blinked once, slow, deliberate. Ethan smiled faintly. "Yeah, I figured you'd understand." Hours passed. The heat rose again, pressing down on the camp until every sound seemed to fade beneath it. The lioness remained in the medical bay, sedated but stable. Ethan checked on her once, standing in the doorway, watching the slow movement of her chest. Claire was inside, running fluids through an IV line, her voice soft as she spoke to the sleeping creature. Outside, the male lion had dragged himself closer to the building, ignoring the pain that racked his body. He stopped near the chain-link fence, lowered himself into the sand, and faced the door where his mate lay. His eyes followed every shadow that crossed that threshold. When the wind picked up, he turned his head slightly to keep the dust from her direction, as if instinct alone could shield her. The rangers began calling him the guardian at the fence. By late afternoon, word of what had happened spread beyond the outpost. A handful of reporters arrived, escorted by nervous park officials. Cameras clicked. Someone asked Ethan to recount the story for the record. He said only, "A lion saved a life last night. That's all anyone needs to know." Claire watched him as he spoke, her expression unreadable. Later, when the cameras were gone and the desert began to cool, she joined him by the fence. The lion lifted his head, eyes following her every step. "He hasn't eaten or drunk anything since dawn," she said. "He's just waiting." "For her," Ethan said. Claire nodded. "You think he knows she's still alive?" Ethan considered that. "I think he's known everything from the start. That's what scares me." They stood there together as twilight stretched across the dunes. The first stars blinked through the fading sky. Somewhere a jackal called out, its cry sharp and lonely. When the door of the medical bay opened, the sound was small, but enough to draw the lion's attention. Two medics stepped out, carrying a tray of supplies. Behind them, the soft glow of a lamp revealed the lioness stirring for the first time in hours. Her head lifted weakly, eyes flickering open. Claire gasped. "She's awake." The lion pushed himself up, swaying slightly, a low rumble vibrating from his chest. Ethan moved closer to the fence, voice steady. "Easy now. She's safe. She's here." The lion's tail flicked once. He didn't roar or charge. He simply leaned forward and pressed his forehead against the metal barrier. The same gesture as before, soft and solemn. Claire whispered, "He understands." Ethan nodded. "Better than most people I know." The next morning, a convoy arrived from the capital. Men in crisp uniforms, new faces with clean boots and cold eyes. They examined the wreckage, took statements, snapped photos of the lions through the fence. One of them, a tall man with polished insignia, approached Ethan afterward. "Ranger Hale," he said. "You'll submit your full incident report to my office by end of week." Ethan squinted at him. "And what happens to the lions?" "They'll be transferred once the female recovers," the officer replied. "A rehabilitation facility outside Windhoek?" Ethan frowned. "That's nearly 300 miles from here. They won't survive. Separation." The man gave a thin smile. "They're animals, Hale. They'll adapt." When he walked away, Ethan felt something inside him snap. Claire saw it in his eyes before he spoke. "We can't let them take her," he said. "You'll lose your job," she warned. He shrugged. "Already did." That night, after the officers left, Ethan sat by the fence again. The lion watched him quietly, eyes reflecting the moonlight. "They're going to move her," Ethan said softly. "They think you won't understand. But you do, don't you?" The lion blinked slowly, then turned his gaze toward the medical bay. He stood limping toward the gate as if ready to follow the scent of his mate no matter where it led. Ethan's radio crackled. "Hale," Claire's voice whispered. "Come to the infirmary." He rose and went. Inside, the lioness was awake, head lifting weakly from the table. Her eyes found the window, found the faint outline of her mate beyond the glass. She made a sound, a deep, throaty rumble, soft but clear. Outside, the lion answered. The sound rolled through the still air, low and haunting, a conversation between two souls that refused to break. Claire's eyes shimmered. "They're talking," she said, "like they've been doing it all along." Ethan watched them, a lump forming in his throat. "They're reminding us who's really civilized." By dawn, the officers had left, convinced their paperwork would bury the story. The rangers dismantled the last of the barricades, pretending normalcy. But the moment the sun touched the horizon, the lion moved. He rose, steady now, and walked to the gate. He stopped, looked back once at Ethan, and waited. Ethan hesitated only a moment before nodding to the guard. "Open it." The gate creaked wide. The lion stepped through, crossing the distance to the medical bay door. He lay down again, just outside, the way a man might wait outside a hospital room for someone he loved more than life itself. When the first rays of sunlight hit his mane, they turned it to gold. The camp fell silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Ethan stood beside Claire, voice barely above a whisper. "He's not just guarding her," he said. "He's guarding the truth." Claire looked at him. "And what truth is that?" "That what's wild isn't cruel," Ethan said. "What's cruel is pretending we're not part of it." The lion blinked once, slow and certain, as if to agree. And as the day began again over the scarred desert, the legend of the guardian at the fence was born. An animal who waited, unyielding, for a world that still hadn't learned what loyalty truly meant. The morning of release began without ceremony. The air was cool and weightless, painted in the soft gold of dawn. Beyond the outpost fence, the desert stretched quiet and endless, a place both cruel and forgiving. Depending on how you approached it, the two lions would return there today, and the humans who had watched them were about to learn what it meant to let go. Ethan Hale stood by the transport truck, his face shadowed beneath the brim of his hat. He hadn't shaved in days, and his eyes carried the exhaustion of a man who had been awake too long in a world that no longer made sense. Claire Mason joined him, clipboard in hand, her tone half professional, half wistful. "She's strong enough," Claire said, glancing toward the lioness resting inside the open transport cage. "No sign of infection. The wound healed better than I expected." "And him?" Ethan asked, nodding toward the male lion pacing along the fence line. "He's restless," she said. "He hasn't eaten much, hasn't slept either. He's been waiting for this moment." Ethan smiled faintly. "So have I." The horizon shimmered as the sun rose higher, turning the sand to pale fire. Rangers moved quietly, loading equipment and checking restraints. No one spoke much. Even the air felt reverent, like a chapel before prayer. The story of what had happened here, the gunfire, the traps, the defiance, had spread through the park like wildfire. The officials had written their reports, polished their lies, and left. But among those who had been there, the truth lived on. A lion had chosen to trust a man, and both had nearly died for it. Ethan stepped closer to the lioness. Her eyes were open now, clear and bright. When she saw him, she blinked slowly, a gesture he'd come to understand. Gratitude, recognition, forgiveness. "You ready to go home, sweetheart?" he murmured. Behind them, the male let out a low, chuffing sound. The same gentle call he'd made that first night in the desert. He was standing by the open gate now, sunlight turning his mane to liquid gold. The rangers backed away, giving him space. No one dared to move too fast or speak too loud. It felt wrong to interrupt what was unfolding. "Let's get this done," Claire said softly. Ethan climbed into the truck bed, unlatched the safety pins, and stepped aside as the door swung open. The lioness hesitated for a moment, muscles trembling beneath her tawny coat. Then she stepped out onto the sand, her limp barely noticeable now, the scar on her leg a pale reminder of pain that no longer owned her. The male was there in an instant. He approached her with a low rumble, brushing his muzzle along her cheek, their tails twining for a heartbeat before separating again. For a moment, the entire camp seemed to stop breathing. Claire swallowed hard. "I'll never get used to that," she whispered. "They love each other?" Ethan nodded. "Love's too small a word for it." The lions turned toward the open plain. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of dry grass and distant rain, freedom. They started walking side by side, slow at first, then stronger with each step, until their strides fell into rhythm, the same rhythm Ethan had once followed through the dark when he'd trailed the male across the desert. When they reached the ridge, the lioness stopped and looked back. The male did the same. They stood there for several long seconds, watching the small figures of the humans who had saved them. And then something happened that no one expected. The male lion took a step forward, closing the distance between himself and the truck where Ethan stood. His eyes found the rangers, and for the briefest moment, they held each other's gaze across the expanse of heat and silence. Then the lion lowered his head, not in fear, not in defeat, but in something that could only be described as acknowledgement. A thank you. Ethan felt his throat tighten. He removed his hat and held it to his chest. "You're welcome, old boy," he whispered. Claire's hand found his arm. "He knows," she said. The lions turned again, moving toward the horizon until the light swallowed them whole. Their shapes became silhouettes, then mirages, and finally disappeared into the shimmer of the dunes. For a long time, no one spoke. Only the wind moved, brushing through the acacia trees like a sigh. Later, as the camp packed up, Ethan stayed behind. He walked to the place where the lions had paused and knelt, pressing a hand into the sand. It was still warm from the morning sun. He could see faint paw prints trailing into the distance, already being erased by the wind. Claire called to him from the truck. "You coming?" "In a minute." He stayed there a little longer, letting the quiet settle around him. The desert seemed endless again, indifferent and eternal. And yet, something had changed. It wasn't the land. It was him. He'd spent his whole life thinking wildness was something that needed controlling, protecting, studying. But the truth was simpler and far more humbling. The wild had been watching him too, measuring his heart, testing his courage, waiting to see if humanity still deserved its place among the living. He rose slowly, dusting off his hands. As he turned to leave, a sound caught his ear. A faint, distant call carried on the wind. A lion's call. Soft, but unmistakable. Ethan smiled. "Goodbye, Guardian," he said. He climbed into the truck beside Claire. The engine started with a low growl, the same kind of sound the lion had made that night in the desert. As they drove away, the sun climbed higher, flooding the world with light. The desert, for all its scars, looked almost peaceful again. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt the same. Somewhere beyond sight, the two lions moved together through the tall grass, their shadows stretching long and unbroken. They had survived the cruelty of man, the indifference of nature, and the weight of pain itself. And though they would never speak, their story would echo across the savannah in the quiet language of the wild. A reminder that mercy is not weakness, that trust is not folly, and that even in the most unforgiving places on earth, love finds a way to endure. Ethan leaned back in his seat, the wind in his hair, the desert unfurling before him like an endless promise. "Guess we both got lucky," he murmured. Claire looked at him. "How's that?" He smiled, eyes on the horizon. "We met something purer than we deserved." As the truck disappeared into the glare of the sun, a final breeze swept over the ridge, erasing the last of the paw prints in the sand. But the story, the truth, remained. Somewhere out there, beneath the same relentless sky, two lions walked together through eternity, carrying with them the proof that the wild still had room for grace. If this story touched your heart, even for a moment, just drop a simple 1 in the comments below. It's our quiet way of saying we felt it too. And if you'd like to walk beside us through more true tales of loyalty, courage, and the wild hearts that still roam this earth, hit subscribe and stay with our little family here. More stories are waiting, and some of them might just change the way you see the world.